Ready for you.
Welcome to Celebrity Interviews with Paul. I am honored today to have with me Maxie Jones. Maxie is an amazing storyteller. I have seen him multiple times at live events at the Moth in Detroit and Ann Arbor. And I'm always amazed at the number of jobs Maxie has held over the course of his life. I think, really, you work there too? It's amazing. It is an honor to have you here, Maxie. Thank you for being with us on Celebrity Interviews.
Thank you for having me, Paul. I feel special that you actually selected me to do this with. I'm honored.
Absolutely. Well, I love hearing you tell stories. You're a natural. It's a beautiful thing. How's life in the pandemic? I know you're coming to us from your basement.
Yes. So I was sent home from work on March 16th. It was Monday, March 16th, and that was the day that I was basically told not to come back. And I actually had to come down into my basement, which was basically a place for all storage. And I had to create a space in my basement. And it took some time. And you know, behind me were these brick walls, and I was looking like I was having Zoom meetings from a prison cell. So I covered the walls and so on. And so I've adjusted to it very well. And the pandemic has been good to me, Paul. You know, I had a doctor's appointment in May, right after Memorial Weekend, and the results were pretty bad. And you know, they told me I was pre-diabetic, I had high blood pressure, but I knew that it was only because of the fact that for those 2 months I had just been in the house, not exercising, not going anywhere, and eating whatever I wanted. So
it's always a danger to have the refrigerator too close at hand.
Yes, yeah, and you can just nap whenever you want.
Yep.
So since Memorial Weekend, I've lost 18 pounds. I've actually decided to turn things around, and since Memorial Weekend, I've lost 18 pounds, and so now it's the case where I like working from home because I'm able to do what I need to do for myself.
Excellent. Well, that's a good thing. That's beautiful. Congratulations. Good for you.
Thank you.
It sounds like it's like the classic COVID roller coaster, right? That we're all
yes.
kind of on in one way or another. And I think too, like initially it was like, oh, well, we can do this for a couple of weeks, and now we're like, oh, we got to do this. Kind of a new thing.
So life might look like this,
right?
So we have to become adjusted to it in the way that it is. As a matter of fact, Paul, I saw you the other day. We were both on that Moth Story Slam, that virtual Moth Story Slam.
Yeah.
And I was one who was saying, I'm not doing any virtual storytelling. But when I realized that, you know, this might be the way it is for a while, I said, you got to roll with the punches. So. Yep,
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, how did you find the Moth? Did it find you? How did you come to storytelling at the Moth?
So Paul, about 20 years ago when I was living in Minnesota, a friend of mine told me about this show called Car Talk on NPR.
Yeah.
Remember Car Talk?
Oh, the Car Talk guys, Ray and Tom, absolutely.
That's right. So I looked up the show, like, when can I listen to Car Talk? This was in the summer of 2014. So I was outside cutting the grass, and I had my earphones in my ear, and I was listening to Car Talk. It came on at 10 o'clock. And when Car Talk went off, I just kept listening. So the next show came on, like maybe Wait, Don't Tell Me, whatever show came on. But then at 12 o'clock, the Moth came on. And I remember having heard someone tell me before about this show called The Moth. So I said, let me listen and see what this is about. And by the time it was over, I was amazed. I was like, man, I gotta do that. I gotta do that.
Do you remember the first story you told on stage?
Yes, it was September 4th, 2014. And it was at Cliff Bell's in Detroit. A friend of mine, a coworker of mine and I, we went, it was both of our first time. My name was called, the theme was Crime and Punishment. And I told a story about when my father and I used to work for this, an illegal gambling operation in Queens, New York.
Okay.
And I went second, and I was in the lead all the way to the end, and my coworker beat me by a tenth of He did to
But
me what you did, Paul.
I did that to you once, didn't I?
Yes, you have.
I did. I think that was hair. I took you at the end at hair.
It was hair, yes.
Right. It was your blowout and my perm.
That's right.
And that night the perm won. It was just luck on my part though. Any other night you'd have taken me.
That was a great night. That was a great night.
It was. A lot of good stories. A lot of good stories.
I don't mind when I get beaten by a good story, that's for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, the nights you get beaten, you're like, that really wasn't even a story. But
Yeah.
There it goes.
Yeah. But when it's a good story, I'm like, yeah. You did that to me a couple of times and you deserved it.
Yeah. Well, you are a phenomenal storyteller. Do you have a favorite story that you've told on the Moth?
Well, I'll tell you what, I've told 99 stories. Can I? Well, here's the thing, Paul.
Yeah.
When the quarantine came about,
Mm-hmm.
I had told my 99th story. And I've always said I'll consider myself great when I've told my 100th story.
So you had to do the virtual one.
I had to do it.
Yeah.
Because March 17th in Ann Arbor would have been my 100.
Okay.
But I can't say that I have a favorite. I have some that I like. One is a story I told about a neighbor of mine who borrowed $400. The theme was money.
Okay.
And it was about a neighbor of mine who borrowed $400, and I didn't want to take the money back because he didn't actually ask to borrow it. I offered it.
Okay.
And I didn't want to take the money back, but instead he just kept giving me so many gifts. I would open up my apartment door and there was stuff outside the door because the guy is from Senegal in West Africa.
Yeah.
And he would bring me all these beautiful African artifacts, canes, walking sticks, rugs, drums. And finally, one day I was like, just give me the money, man. Just give me the money.
We had neighbors and their dog got loose and ran away. It was an older dog. And they had to go to work. And I ended up finding the dog and I had their garage door code in case I found it because I talked to them before they left. And I put the dog back in the house. And they were so grateful. Darnell showed up on my doorstep like later that night with like $80 in cash. And I'm like, I do not want money for putting your dog back in your house. I'm not taking money for putting your dog back in the house. And he's like, no, take it. I'm like, no, I am not taking cash for this. So he leaves. And about a half hour later shows up with an ice cream cake from Baskin and Robbins. I was like, I'll take an ice cream cake for finding your dog.
Right. You can take that.
Enough. Yeah, I'll do that. That's all right. But trying to be neighbors, What have you learned things about yourself through all this process?
Through storytelling?
Yeah. What have you learned about yourself?
Oh, well, the thing is, Paul, the more stories I've told, I found that the deeper I have to dig for more stories.
Sure.
And the digging deep has helped me a great deal because it helps me to be more vulnerable, to expose myself more, not to be superficial.
Sure.
And I have realized people have pointed out to me that I do the same thing in real life. Like I have taken the storytelling skill and I do it in real life.
Okay.
And so I like the fact that it's actually helping me in that kind of way. It's helping me to be a better speaker when talking to people. It's helping me to be more open. It's helping me to be more honest. And that's the great thing about. I thought that storytelling was just something I do on stage and then I walk away. I didn't know that it would permeate my life.
Yeah, it does. It sticks with you, doesn't it? And to be a good storyteller on the Moth, they reward vulnerability. Really do.
Yes, they do. Let me tell you about that, Paul.
Yeah.
I told a story in Detroit one night. The theme was education. And I told a story. You remember?
I do.
Do you remember that I broke down a little bit on stage?
I remember saying to Patty, Maxie cried. Patty Wheeler's the producer of the Moth. Yeah, I remember that. That was a powerful story about your teacher. Yeah. Okay, yes. I cut you off. You share, Maxie.
Well, I went second that night. And I order videos of my stories quite often.
Okay.
And I remember that when I got off stage, I said, that's a story that I don't ever want to see or hear again.
Oh, okay.
But the interesting thing, let me tell you something, Paul. The Moth reached out to me last year in August, July or August, and said that Reader's Digest wanted to publish my story. So that story was published in print in Reader's Digest in the September 2019 issue, which was fine with me because it was in print.
Sure.
Then the Moth sent me an email saying that they wanted to use that story in their the campaign, the fundraising campaign.
Okay.
I said okay, and then they played that story on the podcast. I subscribed to the Moth on YouTube, and I got an alert about 2 weeks ago saying that they were showing that story on YouTube. And then just this past week, I got another email from the Moth saying that they're going to actually play that story on the Moth Radio Hour.
Now this is the story of, was it your father?
About my high school English teacher.
Your high school English teacher, but it was right after the death of one of your parents, right?
My mother.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, and it was about your high school English teacher who took you under his wing and helped you through it all.
Yes.
That was a powerful story. It really was.
And I learned that maybe, you know, I'm not a celebrity. Well, according to your show,
you are now.
But I think about celebrities, and I wonder if the same thing happens with them, where they have a show or something, and it's not their favorite, or maybe their least favorite, but yet it's the one that carries them around the world, possibly, right?
Yeah, I'm a Lutheran pastor, and the kind of the truism for preachers is the sermon that you like think, ugh, this isn't my best work, this isn't fabulous, you know, is the one that you get the most positive response from, inevitably, it seems like sometimes. And the one that you're like, this is awesome, I'm really knocking it out of the park today, they're like, you know.
Yeah, that one goes nowhere.
Right. You're like, no, but that was really good stuff, you know. It kind of works out that way sometimes. Yeah. Well, what brings you, so you keep digging deeper into who you are and learning more about yourself and remembering stuff. How much do you augment the reality of your storytelling as you develop things?
Well, you know, Paul, I learned an interesting thing when it comes to storytelling. Well, I've learned quite a few things from storytelling. One is that laughter is not always because something is funny. I love to make the audience laugh. I get a thrill from it.
Sure.
But laughter doesn't always come from funny tidbits or whatever. Sometimes laughter comes from when you show your vulnerability. You know, laughter comes from honesty, right? Laughter comes from honesty. And then I don't know if is that laughter people are experiencing in the audience, or is it hysterics, right?
Right.
But whatever that is, it results from more than just funny things. Sometimes it comes from vulnerability, it comes from honesty. And when I'm telling my stories,
it's their own discomfort too. We laugh when we feel uncomfortable for you.
Right.
Yeah.
So when I'm putting my stories together for the Moth or for any show, I dig really, really deep for more and more detail as much as I can remember. You know, I have, Paul, I have a couple of friends that I call on the phone and I tell the story to them over the phone.
Okay.
And I have a friend, she actually lives in Florida. Her name is Janet. I call Janet, I tell her my story. And what Janet always does is she asks me questions, background questions about the story.
Right.
And it helps me dig for more detail.
Sure.
And those fine details, those are the triggers. Those are the things that get to the audience.
Right. Like in the story you told on the virtual Moth, you didn't just talk about the couch, it was a velvet couch, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Her red velour couch.
Red velour couch, right? Yeah, those little, and we can feel the velour because we've all sat on one of those before.
Yes, that's right.
So like you bring us there. Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
That's a beautiful thing.
And
Well,
to me, those are the small keys. Those are the small keys to the story. And like what's in the bag, when she said, in this bag, there's the towels and, you know, the details is what the audience loves.
Absolutely. Well, it puts them there, right?
Yep.
It invites them to be in your position and lets them be part of the story in a sense.
Yes.
And they experience vicariously what you did through you. Yeah, that's the beauty of it. And the other thing about story is that people remember that. That's what they remember, stories.
Yep.
You know, in preaching, I try to include stories, even if it's not my own, if it's retelling somebody else's story or a life of somebody else or something, include stories because people remember those kinds of experiences more than just talking about things.
Yeah.
It draws, right. and then my hope is that every now and then they remember why I told the story. That's the danger in preaching, because the story is a vehicle to get you someplace else, and I just hope at the end of the day they remember where we're heading.
The moral of the story.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely. Well, in the midst of all of this, where do you find joy?
Wow, why you ask such a hard question, Paul?
I ask everybody that question.
And you're a Lutheran minister, you said, right?
Yep.
And Paul, I don't observe any religion, but I know that this thing called prayer is a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I do it a lot. I get up every morning and I go for my morning walk, which is part of how I lost some of this weight.
Mm-hmm.
And while I'm walking, I'm talking. I'm saying out loud what I need to say. You know, I do it a lot, and that brings me joy quite a bit, because sometimes, you know, Paul, people talk about faith being the thing that you don't see it, but you kind of know it's there, right?
Right.
And I know that I can bring things into being by expressing it verbally. And even though I'm not holding it in my hand yet, I know that it's there. I know that it's coming, you know? Or
that's beautiful.
Maybe not necessarily something material, but it could be something environmental, what have you.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Maxie. We look forward to hearing you on the Moth, on the Moth Radio Hour on NPR, and look forward to listening to you on the podcast. I look forward to seeing you on stage, whether it's in your basement or back in Ann Arbor or in Detroit. So blessings to you, and thank you so much for being part of this.
I can't wait to see you again on stage, man.